Welcome to Buddhist Center. My name is Jeff Allen, and today, on this beautiful Sunday morning, once again, we're looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment. I feel so fortunate to be able to go over this text again and again and again, and be able to pull the real subtle meaning out of it and see how we can apply all of these teachings on the stage of the path to enlightenment to our daily life, because it's in our daily life where we're accumulating karma, and we're setting the stage for our next life. So this is where the rubber really meets the road. And this is where the teachings are supposed to change us in such a way so that our anger and our attachment isn't kind of at the forefront all the time, guided by our ignorance. And if our anger and attachment isn't at the forefront all the time, and we have a little bit of a control of our ignorance, and we can perceive things in a more realistic way, then this allows us to get closer to the freedom from suffering and the state of ultimate bliss. So it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to look at these teachings with a magnifying glass to make sure that we truly understand them. We don't just intellectually understand them, as Lama Tsongkhapa and the great masters say, at a surface level, because the surface level is just like knowing any kind of information and understanding anything. But the spiritual wisdom is a lot different, because we can intellectually understand a stanza and then meditate on it and look at that stanza again and pull so much deeper meaning out of it because of the subtlety that we are able to understand based on our own personal experience and realization. So we can't just acquire knowledge and think that that is going to get us to Buddhahood. That knowledge should be then penetrating our minds, changing our minds, and turning us into beings that are more like bodhisattvas that can then become bodhisattvas. So that's what I'm always so excited about, is that we have the information right here at our fingertips, in our hands, to be able to achieve all of these states. They aren't somewhere out on Jupiter. This isn't science fiction. This isn't a fictional novel. This is something that shows us exactly what can happen to beings like us, because we have the same components that the Buddha had, in order that he or she used in order to transform into a fully enlightened being. So here we are with that same potential, with that same mental consciousness that has the chance to proliferate, to change into something that is pure, and our mental consciousness that is empty of true establishment, just like the Buddha's mental consciousness. So we have this Buddha nature that can be transformed, proliferate into the actual state of a Buddha's mind, because of the emptiness that our mind possesses, just like the Buddha's mind possesses and possessed emptiness, and that allowed him or her to mature into an enlightened being, and to remove the afflictive obstructions, the obstructions to omniscience, and abide in a state that's free from suffering, in a state of infinite happiness or bliss. So without further ado, let's get started with the preliminaries that will be required no matter what for us to become a Buddha. So we get into a posture that's conducive to meditation. So the 7-point Virokona posture is a posture that's mentioned in the great texts, mentioned in the Lamrim Chemo, mentioned in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand, mentioned in Kamalashila's stages of meditation. So we try to follow the patterns of the great masters so we can achieve the results that the great masters achieved. If we try to follow our own patterns, since beginningless time, we've had an ignorant mind and we've made decisions that are based on distortion. So we should try to follow a non-distorted path, a path that led a being of great qualities to a path of non-distortion, if we want to achieve that same goal, instead of the goal that we've been achieving through our own ideas, ways, and means, which is more of cyclic existence. So 7-point Virokona posture, we put our legs into a Vajra posture if we can, or half lotus, or cross-legged, or on the floor. Whatever we possibly can do, meeting the extent of our capacity. We put our right hand on top of our left with our thumbs touching, making a diamond posture. Our back straight, like a stack of coins. Our vertebrae should be like a stack of coins, should I say. Our shoulders in a comfortable position. This makes for 4. And then our head slightly tilted forward, making for 5. Our eyes slightly open, making for 6 at a 45-degree angle, pointed somewhat down at your nose. Trying to shut off as much visual consciousness as possible, like visual apprehension as possible, whilst not closing your eyes, because closing your eyes reminds you of sleeping. So we have our eyes slightly open, pointed at our nose, and then our mouth in a comfortable position with our tongue on the top of the roof of our mouth, slightly touching the back of our teeth. And then we can add an 8th point, which is the actual breath. So the 7-point Virokona posture sometimes is called 8 points, and that includes the breathing in and out. So in that posture with our legs, our hands, our back, our shoulders, our head, our eyes, and our mouth in the position just mentioned, we start to breathe in and out of our nose, breathing all the way to the top of the breath, filling our diaphragm. So our stomach should be going out as we breathe in, when we breathe in very deeply. So we do this through our nose, but we do it in a very comfortable fashion, not causing us to breathe in real quick or breathe in so slowly that we feel we're gasping for air. We just want to continue with our natural breathing in and out as we do this. So we're in the 7-point Virokona posture, and now we're breathing in and out, bringing the breath all the way to the top, as I say, which is the full extension of the diaphragm, and then, exhaling right when you get to the top of that breath. Sometimes they say hold it for just a moment. If you'd like to hold it, there are some benefits to that. Whatever you're most comfortable with at this beginning level, and you exhale and you count 1. So breathing in through your nose all the way to the top, filling the diaphragm all the way, and then breathing out 1. And then doing this for going through various different rounds of breathing. And seeing how far you can get before your mind is distracted. So this is an exercise that you can do on your own to try to sharpen your ability to rein your monkey mind in. So Pabonka Rinpoche in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand really suggests this, that we check to see how controlled our mind is, and we can do so by this kind of game of numbers. So we do this while we're focusing on the breath, and that number kind of grabs us to remind us that we're focusing on the breath. And then we're going to do that for a moment or so, and then we'll add the visualization of the front generation of Buddha Shakyamuni in front of us. So the point of this is to rein our minds in, free it from the attachment and hatred that we came in here with, try to get it to a more neutral space. And then we imagine an object of observation that's of great virtue and try to focus our mind only on that, focus our mind on something so magnificent, to set our motivation, to set that place from which we'll say, oh, what this great being said to us and told us is so magnificent. And then we'll do the guided meditation, and then we'll get into the section of the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment that we are currently in. So let's begin in that 7-point Virokona posture to breathe in and out in a very natural fashion, focusing only on the breath and the counting and shutting off all of the other things and outside distractions. Now begin to imagine in the space in front of you, Buddha Shakyamuni, about 2 inches tall, maybe about the size of your thumb, 2 feet in front of you at eye height, imagining this in your mind, though. So you're trying more and more to shut off that visual consciousness. And now you're focused on the breathing and on the object of observation, Buddha Shakyamuni, full radiance and beauty, a light body, 3-dimensional, not a polluted, contaminated body like ours with blood and bones and guts, a fully beautiful light body. You can imagine Buddha Shakyamuni on a throne also, supported by snow lions, or just Buddha Shakyamuni. Focus on that object. So happy that we, among very, very few people, can think of such a holy being, heard the words of such a holy being, have had our lives impacted by such a holy being, a fully omniscient being who has loving concern for all of us. And this morning we've been able to think of that being as our single focus. Think about why we came to Buddhism, why we started to be interested in spirituality. We recognize the truths that the Buddha taught us. Start to think about the first noble truth, the superior truth of suffering, and what the Buddha presented to us about that. Think about the 8 sufferings of the birth, aging, sickness, and death, and how each one of those sufferings relate to us personally. We have to make each of these very personal, and so that we can then have a desire to definitely emerge from all of them. So we think of birth, aging, sickness, and death. We think of meeting with unpleasant things in our life, being separated from those things that are pleasant and not getting what we want, and having this basis of the aggregates, having this mind that suffers, having this body that suffers. And because we have this mind and body, we can suffer because it's contaminated. It isn't pure. Think about the 6 sufferings. The suffering of uncertainty, those loved ones all around us, we may not know again until we're a Buddha. Our next life, our greatest enemies, those that we label enemies anyway, may be our closest loved ones. There's no certainty. We're never satisfied. The Buddha said that we get all of the things that we want, we're comfortable, and we're not satisfied. That's our illness. We have to be born into these bodies again and again that are the basis for suffering, and then shuck them off. These bodies we're so attached to and we think are our only bodies. We think there is only Jeff and this is Jeff's only body, yet there won't be a Jeff and there won't be this body. I'll shuck it off. And in the midst of doing that, I'll have to experience the greatest sufferings I've ever had. And the highest happiness is within cyclic existence. And both of those will keep me bound. And no one can accompany me during this journey through all the realms of cyclic existence. I'm all alone, a lone traveler. We see how the suffering of suffering shows us, when we condense all of these different sufferings, that all of those pains, mental and physical, we can relate to, are certain. We look at the suffering of change. It's the bait that keeps us in cyclic existence. It's that happiness that seems to have a self-destruct mechanism in it. We chase after things we think will make us happy. A new car becomes an old car, a new house becomes an old house. Their labels change, the objects, because of impermanence, change. Our relationship to them change. Our loved ones, we're separated from them in so many different ways. These situations change, yet we chase after them thinking they're the only happiness that there is, and they're actually a form of suffering, because it's contaminated happiness found in cyclic existence that we're propelled into again and again. And that's where we land on the pervasive compounded suffering. The third noble truth that the Buddha taught us, that actual suffering that the Buddha said is really, really what I'm talking about when I say this is the superior truth of suffering. It's being forced again and again and again into a set of contaminated aggregates because of our karma and afflictions. Contaminated karma and afflictions, specifically. So over and over and over again, we have the 8 sufferings, the 6 sufferings, the suffering of change, and the suffering of suffering because we have karma and afflictions. It's that state of taking it on over and over and over again. It's called cyclic existence. Like Chandrakirti says, first I grasp at I and then mine. And then it's because of this delusion that sentient beings turn like buckets on a water wheel through cyclic existence. Right in the beginning of the Madhyamika Avatara, we see that. And the Buddha stated that suffering is a result. All results are dependent upon causes. And the Buddha stated that this is the superior truth of origin. The Buddha said that this result, the truth of suffering, is caused by this. And the Buddha stated it was the ignorance that grasp as the self and phenomena as being truly established. This ignorance that misperceives reality causes us to think strangely or inappropriately. And then afflictions arise that corrode our mind and distort everything that we do. And then that distortion causes our contaminated karma, which then results in cyclic existence. So the Buddha stated that it was the ignorance of karma and its results, and the ignorance of reality that starts this whole process, and specifically the ignorance that believes that the I and phenomena are truly established. That was at the root of all of it. And then the Buddha stated that all of this suffering can end. The Buddha stated that because suffering is a result, it necessarily has a cause. And if you take away a cause of a result, it can't occur. And the Buddha said, this is how I did it. So the Buddha first stated, this can all end. This is the superior truth of suffering. And then the Buddha stated, this is how I did it. This is the superior truth of path. This is the path that I realized was necessary to abandon ignorance. And if you want to get rid of the cause of suffering, which is ignorance, you have to understand this nature, this reality that I've understood. And if you engage in this pathway and understand this reality, understand this wisdom, if you engage in the pathway of the three highest higher trainings, and you achieve this understanding of wisdom that's cultivated first through ethics and the concentration that can observe it, you can observe the thing that gets rid of, that is the antidote to ignorance, and be free from cyclic existence altogether. So we feel very relieved, very happy that we have this opportunity. We don't have to suffer ever again. It's in our hands. We have a way to combat it. We have a goal. We have a specific work to do. We in our lives know that if we, have a goal, if we know how to carry out the work to get to a goal. So we should feel very confident at this point that the Buddha has given us really a specific set of steps that we can engage in to achieve the goal, which is freedom from suffering. And at this point, from the perspective of meditation, we have a desire to definitely emerge because we've invested in the meditation on the 8 sufferings, the 6 sufferings, and the 3 sufferings so much that we know that those sufferings aren't sufferings that we want to endure. We've invested in understanding the teaching should in common with beings of small capacity and understand the sufferings of the lower realms, and the teaching should in common with beings of medium capacity and understanding the sufferings of all of the realms. And once we've done so, we understand those 8 sufferings, 6 sufferings, and 3 sufferings, and we have a desire to definitely emerge from cyclic existence. And then the Buddha stated that if we want to not only emerge from cyclic existence, but if we want to have infinite happiness and bliss, and we want to be the most reliable being in the world, we want to be able to help those beings that we love so much, then we would need to engage in a path of compassion, a path of other cherishing attitude, a path that wanted to become a Buddha for others' sake, and you would arrive at a state of being that cherishes others. And if you did so, you would be a perfect being. So the Buddha said, start to observe those around you and think about the suffering that you just thought about yourself, and observe that specific suffering happening to them. So now we think about our friends in a very detailed way. We think about them experiencing the 8, 6, and 3 sufferings because we've understood cyclic existence very well ourselves. We think about strangers, those people that we don't really know who they are, but maybe we even know what their faces look like. Those birds that pass us when we're flying by, the squirrel that runs across the street we're trying to avoid hitting when we're driving our car. We think about all those different types of beings, and we think about the sufferings that they have to endure, and we meditate on that. Next, we think about the mislabeling that occurs when we think about enemy. We think about that term enemy. We know that all sentient beings want happiness, just like we want happiness. We know that all sentient beings have Buddha nature, just like we have Buddha nature. All sentient beings will be a Buddha. Even those that I maybe label my enemy right now will be the only one who can help me. They may become a Buddha before me. We recognize that since beginningless time, we've had rebirth after rebirth, and every sentient being has had every relationship with us. And this being that I label enemy now has been the kindest being to me I could ever imagine, took care of me when I was so vulnerable, but I've forgotten it. And right now, just like me, they're under the influence of their karma and afflictions, and they're experiencing an event that's driven by complete ignorance. A kindness that was given to me before shouldn't be forgotten. And just because this person is a little out of control now, I get a little out of control sometimes. And why should I label them enemy? We start to right-size a relationship with those kinds of beings and recognize that we are just misperceiving a moment that we're just as responsible for as they are when we look at karma and conditions. We see that being as a being who's been so kind to us. We see in this life, friends become enemies, enemies become friends. There's no solid enemy that's there. And when we logically analyze that word, it makes no sense whatsoever. It only holds us back. It only keeps us from Buddhahood. There's some sort of resentment there that is driven by anger. And there's no negativity in the world worse than anger, according to Shantideva. So we try to right-size that relationship, and we think about the different sufferings that they have to endure. They don't want to endure, just like we don't want to endure. They want happiness, just like we want happiness. And we begin to think of an equal desire to benefit all of our friends, enemies, neutrals. And then we think of all other sentient beings, because we have to understand that if even a hearer and solitary realizer, foe destroyer, can't cognize all sentient beings, we should understand that we can't either. Only the Buddha can cognize all sentient beings. So we do friends, enemies, and neutrals. And then we add all of those other beings in order to just express in our minds the magnificence of an omniscient being's mind, in that there are all these other beings that I will have to have as objects of observation for my love and compassion eventually in order to become a Buddha. So it's a placeholder almost for them. So we think of all those beings, and we think how nice it would be if they could have happiness in the cause of happiness. May they have happiness in the cause of happiness. I'll be a cause of that happiness in the cause of happiness. May the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas please bless me to be able to have the strength to carry out that task. And then we think how nice it would be if all of these beings were free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. I'll be part of the cause for them to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas please bless me to be able to carry out this goal. And then we arrive at this idea because of this love and compassion that's been generated by recognizing our own suffering, by having a renunciation that then turns into compassion that wishes to then free all sentient beings from suffering. We arrive at this place where we say, I'll take on the task of freeing each and every being from suffering. And this is called the extraordinary attitude. And this is where we hit a wall. This is where our meditation and our analysis and our logic forces us into this wall and into this conclusion that we must become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. And why? Because we don't have the capacity at this very moment to free all sentient beings from suffering. We can't bring them to a state of happiness. We can't free them from suffering. We are not free from suffering. We aren't in a state of happiness. We don't have happiness to export. We don't have freedom from suffering to export. We don't know all the causes and conditions that will be necessary on all the stages and the paths to be able to achieve complete Buddhahood. It's only the Buddha who knows how to have bliss, infinite happiness, and a freedom from suffering. It's only a Buddha who knows how to bring each and every sentient being in their own individual capacity to that state. Just like the Buddha knows how to bring me to that state, and I have my own individual capacity and aptitude, the Buddha knows how to bring each and every sentient being to that state by knowing their individual aptitudes and so forth. So I don't know that. I can't even imagine beings in realms I can't see. So it's for that reason, if I want to be of utmost benefit and be the most reliable guide, I must become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. So now we arrive at that fact. I must become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. We let that resonate in our mind. May I become Buddha. the excellent qualities of body, speech, and mind, and enlightened activities for the sake of all sentient beings. May I recite the prayers to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. May I listen to the teaching to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. May I give this teaching to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. Now imagine that all the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas are in the space in front of you, all the holy beings that you can imagine. Khensur Geshe Wandak, smiling and radiant, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, all the other Gurus you can imagine in the profound view lineage, Nagarjuna, Manjushri, and all these wonderful masters, Chandrakirti, all of them, Buddha Palita and Arya Deva and Shanti Deva, and imagine the extensive deeds lineage with Maitreya Sangha and Dharma Kirti and Vasubandhu and Dignaga, and there's so many others. Just imagine all of these great beings. Imagine the 17 Nalanda Pandits that make up the profound view and extensive deeds lineage, and imagine all the tantric lineage, the lineage of blessings coming from Tilo and Naro. So imagine that all these great beings, all the highest yoga tantra, yogic tantra, performance tantra, and action tantra deities are all in the space in front of us. All the 35 Buddhas, all the protector deities. Imagine that they're all assembled in the space in front of us, and so happy that we've chosen on this Sunday morning to engage in a practice that will lead us to Buddhahood, because all the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas want is for us to achieve Buddhahood. That's their main goal and purpose in life, is showing us to our capacity what it will take to become a Buddha. And they see all beings assembled here, listening to a teaching on the Mahayana and knowing that the Mahayana is the only Dharma that leads to complete Buddhahood, So they're so full of happiness and so forth. And you imagine that all sentient beings are starting to assemble all around you, and that you can imagine that you have infinite hands that are grabbing infinite beings of the hell, hungry ghost, animal, human, demigods, and God's realm. And imagine that all of these beings are assembling around you, and that you're leading them now in prayer, and you're leading them in to hear these teachings, and they understand these teachings and so forth. And they're doing everything that you're doing in terms of thinking about the teaching and praying and listening to the teaching and so forth. So you imagine that you've brought all these sentient beings here. And now you imagine the merit field of all the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, all these great beings, Khensur Geshe Wandak, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, all these other great lamas and beings are all there and have been just now filled with bliss, because they see that every sentient being is here, and they want every sentient being to achieve Buddhahood. And now they know that every sentient being is here, and finally, all at once, doing this with a heart of love and compassion. So you have all of these sentient beings around you. The Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas are now full of bliss. Imagine that you and all sentient beings have a white Om on your crown, a red Ah at your throat, and a blue Hum at your heart. And now imagine that from this bliss, from the merit field, white light rays are showering down on you and all sentient beings and turning into white Oms, and transforming the Om at the crown of your head that stands for your body into a pure body. And then these light rays and nectars are becoming red and turning into red Ahs, and going to the red Ah at your throat and all sentient beings' throats, and purifying all of your speech. So you imagine that it's just, and then blue light rays and nectars are transforming into blue Hums that are dissolving to the heart, your heart, and all sentient beings' heart, and purifying your mind. So the white Om purifying your body, red Ah purifying your speech, and blue Hum purifying yours and all sentient beings' minds. So you imagine this like a blizzard of Om Ah Hum taking place, and this, all these Om Ah Hums dissolving into yourself and all sentient beings, and purifying the negativities of body, speech, and mind. Because we know it's the negativities of body, speech, and mind that gives rise to our suffering. So imagine this is all taking place, and with this visualization held intact, we now will do the prayers, the Heart Sutra, and so forth. So imagine you are leading all sentient beings in this prayer, all your family, every sentient being you can imagine. The Sutra of the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha at Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of the Sangha monks In a great gathering of the Sangha Bodhisattvas, at that time, the Blessed One entered the samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble family trained who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita, addressed in this way, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said to Venerable Shariputra, O Shariputra, a son or daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita should see in this way, seeing the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form, emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics, there is no birth and no cessation, there is no impurity and no purity, there is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, no eye dhatu up to no mind dhatu, no dhatu of dharmas, no mind conscious dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance up to no old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the Bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of Prajnaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear. They transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the three times by means of Prajnaparamita fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequal mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering, should be known as truth, since there is no deception. The Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way. So the Prajnaparamita mantra stands for the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, the path of seeing, the path of meditation, and the path of no more learning. And all of those five paths are empty of inherent existence. This mantra that stands for those five paths is empty of inherent existence. Gade, Varazangadi Bodhisvaha Om Gade Gade Varagade 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 Varazangadi Bodhisvaha. Thus Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, Good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is, O son of noble family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita, just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra, noble Avalokiteshvara, and the Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Gala jubene jodamba ne nguje du junga yidu do jen druva mai bujinzi nezo gandro zula jaze lo gazamara de janara samara. Aga samara de janara samara yame de ada ongate gate baragati barasangati bodizo baba gonje sonji gaye de medoji she kabadoji mebadoji shkewadoji ragi baji medu bejen danji je dingo yezo ye no jaje je wada medu ne bejen danji wada somba jonji bundon donjoji dashi de janden da de lejo. Now we make a mandala offering as a request for teaching. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy Lamas high, wrap the sky of your Dharma bodies in massive clouds and knowledge and love, and let them pour upon the earth of your disciples as we are ready. Shower of rain, the teachings deep and wide. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. Idam Guru Radha Mandala Gandhi Radhayami. Nanye Jananda Ye Jananda Janju Bada Danye Jansu Jendagi Nanye Jala Benje Nanye Jubasho Nanye Jananda Ye Jananda Janju Badu Danye Jansu Jendagi Jishe Jibesu Nanye Jala Benje Nanye Jubasho Danye Jananda Ye Jananda Janju Badu Danye Jansu Jendagi Jishe Jibesu Nanye Jala Benje Nanye Jubasho. The one who is transformed into the reliable guide, motivated by altruism to benefit sentient beings, the teacher Sugata, the protector to you, I make prostrations. The one who has eliminated the web of conceptualization is endowed with the divine bodies of vast and the profound, who eternally shines forth the forever noble light raised to you, the Buddha, I make prostrations. Inspired by wisdom and compassion today in the Buddha's presence, I generate the mind of full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. May this teaching be heard and understood and realized in the minds and language of all sentient beings. All right. So welcome everyone on all the different platforms. I'm so glad everybody could join us. We're looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, a text that Khenso Geshe Wandok taught us for over 10 years and taught us in such great detail. And before the end of his life, he was so happy that we were going back to the beginning of this, because the beginning of this text is really the foundation of all of our Buddhist practice. It's the foundation that allows us to wish to move forward, wish to kind of go on and keep our interest in practicing the Buddhist path. I've seen way too many people get involved with Buddhism and try to go right to the highest yoga tantra, go right to compassion without really understanding the nature of cyclic existence, the nature of previous lives and so forth, and the nature of one's own suffering. And it really starts to sputter out after a while. And the dedication kind of leaves because that foundation isn't there. That foundation that drives you into joyous perseverance isn't there. And like anything in life, when you first learn about it or you first know something that you're attracted to, it has, it's very exciting. And you want to know everything there is to know about it. But if you skip things when it comes to spiritual practice, and you think because you're some sort of advanced person, or because we as Westerners have this huge ego, we think that we don't need to do some of the preliminary things. And I'm so grateful that Rinpoche just drilled this information into our heads over and over and over again in order for us to understand it. So when we look at the Great Treatise on the Stage of the Path to Enlightenment, we divide it into those 4 categories that Lama Tsongkhapa does right after the prologue at the beginning of the text, right after the homage section. He says, first, we show the greatness of the teacher and shows Lord Atisha and the lineage and everything that leads back to Buddha Shakyamuni, but specifically focuses on Lord Atisha and then the greatness of the teaching, showing how it has these great different points to it that allows us to see all teachings are free from contradiction, allows us to know that all of the teachings that Lord Buddha gave are instructions for us to actually practice. They aren't just wise sayings, and they aren't for only some of us, right? There are things that we're to put into practice. By understanding this teaching, we can easily understand what Buddha meant, and we can then, number 4, refrain from the great wrongdoing, which is abandoning certain teachings and not understanding that all teachings are roads that lead to complete Buddhahood. And the Buddha gave 84,000 bundles of teachings. The Buddha taught to so many different scopes and capacities. And we know in our own life, everyone's different. Everyone has different interests, scopes, and capacities. And the Buddha realized that. So he gave these varieties of teachings that seemed to be kind of different in some cases, but they were merely teachings that would show how beings at every single level and scope would be able to eventually end up at a state of Buddhahood. And the Buddha stated that those foundational practices were going to be necessary for everyone. And that's why when we divide these teachings into categories, and we're right now in the smallest section, we say that are shared in common. So we say the teaching shared in common with beings of small capacity. And then we get to the next section, we say the teaching shared in common with beings of medium capacity, because both of these common levels or capacities are necessary in order to understand the great capacity. The small capacity is necessary in order to understand the medium capacity. So these first 2 capacities are in common, whether they're in common when we look at it in terms of the medium capacity having the commonality with the small, or in common where we look at the great capacity having the commonality with the medium and small. So those medium and small teachings are required for us to generate the great scope teaching in order for us to become bodhisattvas. So we enter the great scope is that bodhicitta, the door into the great scope is bodhicitta. That's the door into the Mahayana practice. But that door only opens if you have all of the trainings that tell you how to turn that knob. And those trainings are the trainings that lead up to renunciation. And these practices that we're learning about now in these preliminary stages are what lead us up to renunciation. So that's what's so great about the teaching, is we see it's taught to all these different capacities. And then the next category, number 3, is how to listen to and explain the teaching. So we learned how to listen to this holy teaching that was given by a great teacher, by a holy being. And we know, and these are really great tools that we can apply to our daily life as well. When we try to abandon the 3 faulty pots, it says, don't come to a teaching listening with being like a pot that's overturned. If you have a vessel that's overturned, you can't put anything in it. If you come in here with a closed mind, you won't be able to learn anything. You'll be like a pot you can't put any water in. Don't be like that. And then it says, if you want to, learn about this in the right way, if you want to hear correctly, don't be like a pot with a hole in the bottom. Don't be a leaky pot that's only kind of paying attention, that's easily going to forget. So the water's going to run out eventually. So that's not the good kind of pot to be. And then the third kind of pot is a pot that's contaminated. It comes in with all, if you have a pot that has poison in it, it's not really a good vessel for, if it's a drinking water vessel, right? If you want to drink out of it. Or even if you want to plant something in it, if you put poison in it, it'll kill the plant. So you don't want to be that kind of pot. What would be that kind of vessel be like? That would be someone who comes in with preconceived notions, all these prejudices, and just isn't listening and just mixes their own ideas in with all the other ideas and really doesn't come up with a purity of the teaching. So we can see how in our daily lives, if we approached every interaction we have with our friends and our loved ones, and even just people in general, if we were really truly there to listen and we were present at that moment in time, how much more of an effect it would have on the person who's in front of us and our relationship with them. So this doesn't just apply to Dharma. This shows us how to be a better human being, because better humans become Buddhas. So that's the whole point of this. So it shows us how to listen to instructions, and then how, if we eventually get the aptitude and the ability, how to give instructions. And then it says, now how we lead students through the actual instruction. So this is the body of how Lama Tsongkhapa says next, after you know how to listen to and eventually, how you would talk about these things. Now, how do you practice from start to finish? So this is the section that we're in, and we've gone over a bit of this, and we went over the greatness of the teaching, right? I'm sorry, the greatness of the teacher, relying on a spiritual guide, how necessary as the foundation of our spiritual path it is to have a teacher. Very obvious, if you want to learn something, you need to have a teacher. And we went over this in great detail, and you can look at all of the great commentaries on the greatness of the teaching to find the rest of that out. And specifically in this, relying on the teacher, sometimes translated as guru devotion. So the first topic in the Lam Rim, in the section called how to lead students in the actual instruction. So it begins on reliance on the spiritual teacher, and shows us how to meditate on all of the topics that we're going to learn, shows us how to be very specific about what we're going to meditate about, tells us we need to, for once, get our mind under control and tell it what to do. And then we're going to start by telling it to think about relying on a teacher. And this is how we're going to think about it. We're not going to think about other things. We may do a meditation before it to go over a general presentation of the entire path, or a glancing meditation. But if we are going to do it that way, we're going to tell our mind before we sit down, that's what we're going to do. And before we sit down, if we're going to meditate on relying on a teacher, we're going to tell our mind, we're going to glance meditation on the path, and then we're going to meditate on relying on a teacher, and we're not going to do anything else. We're going to harness our mind and start to get better at concentrating on things, so our mind doesn't always have to be distracted and out of control. We're learning how to get control of our mind and be able to tie a subject into the center of it and analyze it and look at it in different ways without being distracted. So Lama Tsongkhapa shows us how to do that so that we know how to move forward with the rest of the topics. And then Lama Tsongkhapa shows us, with the refuting misconceptions part, why you have to analyze things and why it's necessary and why conceptuality is part of the path, and also fixed meditation is part of the path. So we've gone over that. Next, we get to this gratitude part. So we know we need a teacher. We lead up to this. We know that the teacher is the foundation of all our qualities, and we've learned how to think about that properly in meditation. Meditation is merely familiarization with an object of observation. So Lama Tsongkhapa has given a briefing on how to do that with all the topics moving forward to us, until he gets into the heavy section on meditation, and he opens the kind of curtains a little bit wider and shows us how to really get good at meditation, where we would get to a point where we could look at one object for 4 hours and develop at that same time this bliss of body and mind at the same time that wouldn't be a hindrance to our ability to sit on that object. But that's like curtains open up later. Now it's just telling you how to think about something without thinking about other stuff, and how to ingrain your mind in topics that will allow you to get renunciation, either of the lower realms of cyclic existence in the small scope, or all the realms once we get to the medium scope. So we get to this next topic of human life of leisure and opportunity, and we have gratitude. We know we have this human basis. We have the potential to love. We have the potential to have compassion. We have the potential to engage in meditation. We have the potential to learn things. We aren't in a leisureless state. And we'll learn about some of those leisureless states today. We aren't in any of those 8 leisureless states that we find in the great texts. We have the conditions necessary. We have the opportunities necessary, inner and outer, in order to practice Dharma. So this meditation gets us to a place of gratitude, where we wake up in the morning and are so grateful that we have this human basis, because we know that even the holy beings pray to be born into this basis, because it's such a good basis to practice spirituality in. It's a great basis to do really terrible things in as well. Like, the pendulum can go both ways, and believe me, I know all about that. But it's an incredible basis if you want to just rein that mind in and tell it to shut up for a second, from which to practice spirituality. And holy beings want what we have. So this section gets us to really have gratitude for what we have and for what it can do. And then the next section talks about what we could do with it, right? It says there's these 3 capacities that I've just mentioned a few times already. These capacities of beings. You could, with this human basis, figure out how to never be in the lower realms of cyclic existence again. With this human basis, you could figure out, and that's the small scope. With this human basis, you could figure out how to never have to suffer in any of the rounds of cyclic existence ever again, how you could achieve nirvana. So the Buddha, shows us, what you could do also at the medium scope with this basis. And then the Buddha says, with this basis too, you can have Buddhahood, you can have infinite bliss, you can have freedom from suffering, and you can be the most reliable being for everyone in the universe. You'll be able to help everyone in the most pure way. So here are the different brochures. What do you want? What would you like to do with this human basis? And most of us will answer, well, I want the bliss. I want the reliability and the freedom from suffering. I want all of the good stuff. So that's what I'm going to go for. So it gets us excited about this potential even more, that we have this human basis that can become a Buddha. So Lama Tsongkhapa is leading us through these stages in very, very clear ways, using logic to get our mind there, not using some, far out there statement that makes no sense, using logic, because that's how we deal with the empirical world. We use our minds, we think, we reason, cause and effect. So Lama Tsongkhapa is getting us here through analysis, so we can get the wisdom arisen from hearing, and then from analysis, and then from meditation. So Lama Tsongkhapa is showing us how to arrive at that final wisdom arisen from meditation, that direct kind of perception of reality that came about through hearing and through learning. So Lama Tsongkhapa is saying that, yes, you have all of these opportunities in your hands as this human being, and we're so grateful. The next section is on death and impermanence. So now, it starts to get a little bit darker. Lama Tsongkhapa says, yes, you have this human basis of leisure and opportunity, but you're definitely going to die. You don't know when. And the only thing that's going to help you, is the Dharma practice. The good deeds you've done are what you carry with you, and the bad deeds you've done will carry with you. Good deeds will bring happiness, bad deeds will bring suffering. Good deeds mixed with wisdom realizing emptiness will bring complete freedom. Good deeds mixed with the wisdom realizing emptiness and bodhicitta will bring you complete freedom and bliss. Right? So that's all we bring with us when we die, and we'll definitely die. Life's always, we're definitely going to die. Everyone dies. We see in history all of these beings have died. We see Buddha's not with us anymore. Khenso Geshe Wandak's not with us anymore. Benjamin Franklin's not with us anymore. Jesus Christ isn't with us anymore. Abraham's not with us anymore. Everyone's died. Whether they've died and gone on to some spiritual place that's special or more special than us, I don't know. All I can go by is what historical accounts, and all of these beings have passed away and are no longer in this world. And life is always being subtracted from and never added to. We aren't gaining moments in time. We're losing moments in time. And we won't have any time to practice spirituality because we'll be so caught up in everything else. And we'll think we have time because we won't believe we don't have time. And then we recognize that we don't know when we're going to die. It's not fixed where we live. It's not like, oh, you get 100 years for sure, kid. You're all set. Don't worry. You're just clicking away. When you get to 80, you can do something about this. We don't know when we're going to die. It's not fixed. We see that babies die, and we see that people 110 die, and anywhere in between, randomly, just like this, car accident. You just go out to get some bread, and that's it. We don't know when we're going to die. There's a lot more causes for death than life. Think about it. Take some vitamins, maybe, eat well. How many other things will kill you today? Think about it. Think about your organs. Think about your blood. Think about breathing. How many things? How many things in your life? How many causes and conditions are going to keep your life extended versus could end it right at that moment? And this body, what is this body we care so much about? Is how significant is it? Just like this, cut it like this, and how many minutes? How significant is this thing we polish that gets older and stinks later on? And we need others to carry us around. But we polish it, put makeup and perfume, buy all these clothes with labels in order to just adorn this thing that eventually is the thing that is the reason we have to die. This body we think is so significant. It's just like a becoming that old car that we can't replace. Our karma will force us into a replacement, but we can't just in this life say, I just want a new body. This body is insignificant. When we're dying, can our material things help us? Maybe we'll be in a nicer hospital bed at that time of death. Maybe we'll have more flowers around us. You know, can we take all of our bank account and put it in our coffin or in the incinerator with us, and let somehow will we be able to bring it wherever we go? No. Our house will be someone else's house, won't be our house. We call it our house, we're so attached to it. Now it's going to be someone else's house. They'll call it their house. Don't worry. Your money will be someone else's money if you have a pile of it. Don't worry, won't be your money anymore. None of these things we can bring with us. Our friends, our loved ones, unfortunately, we know there's uncertainty. We believe in beginningless lives and a beginningless consciousness, and that our karma and their karma isn't exactly the same, and they're not going to be forced at the time of death into the same place we're going to be forced necessarily. We have all of these varieties of beings all around us. We're related to all of them if we believe in beginningless rebirth. We were just as close to our enemy as we were to our closest loved one. So we can't bring any certainty with us. What we think in this life is so certain, we don't bring with us. We don't bring our friends and our loved ones. What do we bring? The only thing that can help us is Dharma. We only bring our Dharma practice. We only bring the good and bad things that we've done in this life, the virtue and non-virtue. Virtue brings happiness, non-virtue brings suffering. Virtue mixed with wisdom brings freedom from all suffering. Virtue mixed with wisdom and compassion brings freedom from all suffering and bliss and reliability. So we recognize that we're going to die. So that this gives us, we are grateful for what we have, and now there's a sense of urgency, right? So what happens when we die? And then we arrive next in the section on reflecting in future lives. And I know as Westerners, this is everyone's favorite section on the lower realms of cyclic existence, and the hell realms, and the 8 hot hell realms, and the 8 cold hell realms, and the hungry ghosts, and all the descriptions of the lands they live in and their bodies so distorted and so forth. And then the descriptions of the animal realms. And what I have to say is that I was thinking of something interesting this morning. An omniscient being, the Buddha, has been very, very reliable in terms of information that the Buddha's given us. If we look at the cause and effect, and we look at the logic and reasoning, and we look at Madhyamika Prasangika view, like we look at Arya Deva's 400 verses, and he says, if you are having trouble with the Buddha talked about in terms of the extremely hidden or the very, very hidden, look at things that are hidden, that aren't manifest to us, that the Buddha taught, that you could only arrive at through rigorous analysis, science, and reasoning. And that will give you more faith in these more kind of very hidden facts. So let's start with this idea that an omniscient being, as Buddhists, we go for refuge to the Buddha because we believe the Buddha is a reliable guide. Why? Because the being is omniscient. So this omniscient being says, hey guys, there's more out there than you know about. There are these realms of suffering that you can't even imagine. You can see the animal realm, and you can see, various degrees of suffering in the animal realm. My dogs are upstairs on a Tempur-Pedic, probably watching this, 4 pit bulls on a Tempur-Pedic watching this teaching right now. So, and then there's, a fox with mange we see sometimes walking on the wall outside. So there's obvious varying degrees of dog-like existence. Now think about all of the animal realm existence. But the Buddha said that there was something called a hell realm and a hungry ghost realm, and then gave very, very, very specific descriptions of these realms and did it over and over and over again. This isn't something that was like a teaching that was just for this person. The Buddha said that this is your sitch. You're going around and around and around. You're going to go hell, hungry ghost, animal, human, demigod, God, and not necessarily in that order, over and over and over again until you get your mind and behavior under control. So the Buddha taught us these other potentialities. So, we can't believe there's a hell realm or a hungry ghost realm. Flashback, go back 200 or 300 years. Okay, you have somebody somewhere in 200 years, right, in New England, who's never read a book. There's no television, there's no internet. And talk to them about the wild beast of the Amazon. Really, really, go back to that person's mind and tell them about serpents and anacondas, right? They wouldn't believe that that was possible. They would think that this was a fairy tale and the stupidest thing they'd ever heard, and that you were just telling them some sort of fiction, right? I mean, it's true. I think there's a whoa going off in some of your minds, right? So just because we can't perceive something, just because our limited ability, hold on one second. Just because we have a limited ability to perceive something, it doesn't mean that that thing isn't there. And what happens to us time and time again is that we believe empirical reality that we can see is the only thing that there is. We believe that we have a self that's truly established. We believe that all of these things have objective existence all around us. We're over and over again misperceiving things. Hold on one second. I want to. Okay, hold on. Anyway, one of the transmissions only goes for an hour, so I wanted to kick it back on. But my faithful assistant and loved one Lori is here, hopefully fixing it. Now we'd have to share it in order to just share it. It's fine. Now go back on live. Okay, so I'm back. So these realms that we can't see, we need to just table our that doesn't exist. And think about what if it could exist. An omniscient being is saying that there are these things that are so much more horrible than we could ever imagine. And haven't we in our own life experienced, and now go over down here.
And then hit live.
Haven't we in our own life had kind of trap doors below the suffering we thought was the worst suffering we could experience, right? Haven't we even seen in society levels of suffering more than we could ever imagine and couldn't think was possible? So keep an open mind when you hear about these 8 hot hells, which I won't go into all the details with, but I do really encourage all of you to study them because these details are details that will enhance your renunciation. So 8 hot hells, 8 cold hells, the hungry ghost realm where there's so much insatiability and just searching for just a little something to eat and everything is just a mirage that they think they're going to have. So we see that there are all these other potentialities, and we can watch the animal realm. And then in our daily lives, when we look at behaviorally concordant results, right? And we look at the sufferings that are experienced in the hell realms and kind of the attitudes, the mental attitudes of a hell being. And we look at the sufferings in the hungry ghost realm, the mental attitudes. And we look at the suffering in the animal realm and the mental attitudes. It's very interesting how we can see we have very similar mental states that maybe aren't as coarse, but arise very, very readily. If we look at addiction, I could say, I have experience in my life with that. And when you get into that state where this happiness that you're going after just isn't there, right? And it's like this salt water you're drinking over and over and over again. Just like the descriptions of a hungry ghost, right? So maybe there's some connection there to my mental state. My behavior is kind of a runoff, right? Or was a runoff, not is, that, was a runoff of those kind of behaviors and predispositions of longing and having nothing and needing something so badly. That just sounds like, an addict in some ways. When you look at the state of suffering of a hungry ghost, look at the state of suffering of the humans that the Buddha said. You're always feared that something's going to eat you bigger than you, and that you're led around like a slave, right? You're controlled by others. How often do we feel powerless and controlled by others? How often, right? How often do we feel used? And how often it says the animals that are ignorant and don't know what's going on. How often are you like, I just don't know what's going on? right? So all of these things are connected. Our previous lives and the actions that we engage in and what we're familiar with. Meditation's familiarization, right? So what we familiarized ourselves with over and over again in those other lives plays a role in our who we are now, of course. So just think for a moment, maybe this is possible. What about the torment that you may have, if you believe it, experienced in the hell realms, the 8 hot hell, the 8 cold hell, and just that immense amount of suffering that disallowed you to think of anything else but that suffering. Have you been in that state? Can you relate to that? So that if you can take small amounts of the state that you're in or have experienced and relate them to the lower realms of cyclic existence, you can see how something a little worse than you've experienced that's exactly the same in some ways could happen. If someone could starve to death while we're so full, that could probably happen. You couldn't imagine that, right? It's happening to someone right now, right? So things that we don't think, could just be happening at this very moment, and our mind has to go to think about, and we can't see that thing happening in front of us. We don't have a video camera of that person starving to death. But we can use science and reasoning to understand it and use the logic that the Buddha wouldn't have any reason to present this over and over again if he hadn't experienced it directly, if he wasn't through and able to see all of these different realms directly. There wouldn't be any value in adding on. The Buddha didn't need to add on suffering. You could have stayed with the human realm and explained it thoroughly if that's all there was, and we could have developed renunciation from that. But when we know it gets worse and we're out of control, that gives us more desire to practice. And if we know our whole reality, we know our whole current state, then we can make intelligent decisions about what to do at that point, or what to do with it. So it's very, very tactful, the way Lama Tsongkhapa first shows us this human life of leisure and opportunity, how we have these opportunity to be a small, medium, or great scope, but we are going to die. And when we die, here are some of our options. So the point of this section for the small scope practitioner is to get a taste for these potential existences. And then Lama Tsongkhapa gets into refuge and then more presentation of how we then get into these predicaments. So it's very interesting. This section gives us the opportunity to not have to take the whole of cyclic existence. It gives us the opportunity to say, if there's something worse than this, and it seems like there is because I can see the animals, I definitely don't want that. So, even if you haven't understood the suffering of suffering, right, and you still think that this is, in some ways that the happiness, the contaminated happiness is happiness in the human realm is not so bad, at least you're getting on the way. You're on your way to getting to that idea where you start to understand that the contaminated happiness is suffering, and that the suffering of change, which is happiness, is bait that keeps you in cyclic existence and so forth. So Lama Tsongkhapa spoon feeds us this information so that we don't miss a step, so that we first, because human beings are very good at looking at the coarse things, and as Westerners, we love that so much. We love sound bites. We love like the coarse kind of ideas around things. So it's really very interesting the way that it's presented in this way, so that we can adapt our minds accordingly, the way that we observe things coarsely, and then we can look at them more with a magnifying glass. So these presentations Lama Tsongkhapa gives initially are very coarse, down to the most subtle, finite point, where we get to the special insight section of the Great Treatise on the Stage of the Path to Enlightenment, that third volume, that has been debated since the 1400s in great monasteries, right? So we're so fortunate that we're looking at that text that really serves as the foundation of all the great masters in our tradition's meditation and path. And it's kind of their guideline to go back to always. Well, what did Lama Tsongkhapa say in the Lamrim Chemo? It's funny. You have a lot of commentaries, and they all kind of always go back to that. Jamyan Sheba, Basuji Jetsun, all these great commentaries. Jayan Gabi Lodru, Panchen Sunandrapa, and the other textbook writers of the great monasteries. They always, well, what did Lama Tsongkhapa say? Is always, goes back to that. And then debate Lama Tsongkhapa as well, right? We debate the Buddha. We cut and rub all of the teachings. I was thinking the other day that the monks and nuns have been ferociously, right? If we look at, however long, have been debating the Buddha for 2,600 years and trying to prove the Buddha wrong. And by doing so, they realize they can't because they've cut and rubbed the teachings and analyzed them completely. So now these monks and nuns that have tried for 20, 30, 40 years working on these Geshe and Geshe degrees realize they can't disprove the Buddha because it's valid cognition. Then they can assert that they truly, truly understand and have cut and rubbed those teachings and have an incontrovertible faith that comes from analysis, not from some blind place. So it's interesting that for thousands of years, or at least 1,000 years, people have been debating the Buddha and trying to prove the Buddha wrong in some ways. If you look at how we dissect the tenet systems, the Vibhashika and Sautrantika and Chittamantran school and Madhyamaka school, and show how each of these systems play with one another, and we're either just to scope or we're the actual reality, right? So it's interesting how everyone arrives at all the Buddha's teachings are not contradictory. Any scholar does, any great scholar arrives at all the teachings are free of contradiction. And sees that they're all for the purpose of leading a sentient being to enlightenment. But then there were teachings like these teachings on cyclic existence in the 6 realms of samsara that were given over and over again that seemed very, very kind of standard teachings that were given to everyone, were more of a universal teachings like the 10 non-virtues and so forth, more universal teachings that you could say would be pervasive throughout. So if the Buddha put that much importance on this idea of other realms than we can see higher than and lower than us, we should take heed of it and look at it. And I can say that I have a belief in these lower realms now, not because I've seen them, just because I've looked at the other body of work, and I have just so much faith in what Buddha said based on all of these other points that I don't see any reason for this presentation to be made. And I feel, like I said before, these connections, because of the meditations I've done on the specificity of these realms and the connections to the emotions that I have in this life, I see how the potentiality is there for that. And I can almost imagine myself as if I'm doing a tantric practice as this hungry ghost being. And it becomes even more real for me. This isn't a practice that I'm teaching or some practice. This is the wrong way to equalize and exchange self with others. But in terms of relatability, in terms of empathy that turns into compassion, I think it's great to imagine yourself in all of these different realms. And the Lamrim teachings definitely reinforce that. Imagine yourself an animal with horns. Imagine yourself this hell being. Imagine yourself this hungry ghost being. And when we do this, if we can relate our own experiences that are like theirs, it makes that meditation so much more stronger. So we start to get familiar with all of these different potentials for our suffering that can happen. So in the friendly letter, for instance, we see when Nagarjuna talks about the hell realms. So this is the letter to a friend. It says, sinners who hear of the boundless sufferings in the hell, separated from them only until the mere termination of their breathing, and are not completely terrified, have hearts as hard as diamonds. So you haven't thought, your heart isn't open. If you are frightened merely by seeing paintings of hell realms, by hearing of it, recalling it, reading about it, and by representations of it, what need to mention experiencing the fierce actuality of it? So we imagine that we're these beings because we have been and we will be if we don't get our acts together, right? And this motivates us to want to definitely emerge, and then later motivates us to have such compassion for all beings who are in the same exact predicament. So that's the quote from Nagarjuna in the friendly letter. And it also then is quoted as saying, just as among all kinds of happiness, the cessation of craving is the king of happiness, so among all kinds of suffering, the suffering of the lowest hell is the most fierce. The suffering of being viciously pierced with 300 lances for a full day cannot compare, cannot even be mentioned with the least of sufferings of hell. So when we think, we could imagine, like if you've ever been pierced even by a thorn, right? So it says, imagine if, like, okay, so you know a little bit about that suffering. Imagine if you had 300 lances into you, stabbed into you, right? For a full day. That's not even as bad as the slightest suffering. So you start to be able to, through your own relatability, relate to others, develop a desire to emerge because you don't want that to happen, and then develop compassion for those that are there, and then those who will have to go there. If they don't get their acts together, you'll both have to. So we start to meditate on these things in order to want to emerge for ourselves, but then also to want to free other sentient beings from that state that they're in. This allows us to truly taste all beings' experience. Then it depends on how we list these. In Vasubandhu sometimes lists the hungry ghost above the animals because they're smarter. But then mostly other times we put the animals above the hungry ghosts because they don't have as much suffering. The hungry ghosts can't really do much with their smarts because they have so much suffering. They could understand Dharma though if they could not have so much suffering, whereas an animal couldn't. But an animal doesn't have the amount of suffering. So we'll do it in the standard fashion where we now talk about the hungry ghost. So in the Nagarjuna's friendly letter to a friend, it says, hungry ghosts never heal the suffering of destitution due to desire. So they're always suffering due to desire. So when I said about addiction, you can be addicted to so many things, addicted to your phone, addicted to eating, addicted to heroin, addicted to alcohol, addicted to exercise, right? There's so many things. Take your pick, we can become addicted to. So we can all relate to that maybe in some way, or something we've become obsessed about. And when we become addicted to something, we could see how it can take a bad turn, right? Some things we could have a positive turn. So I'm not trying to argue, right? But most things we're addicted to, if we look at how addiction is and that craving and that non-control, right? This is what the hungry ghosts have. Hungry ghosts never heal the suffering of destitution due to desire. They are subject to fierce suffering produced by hunger, thirst, cold, exhaustion, and fear. Some with mouths the size of a mere needle's eye and stomachs as round as mountains are tormented by hunger, lacking the energy to search for even a bit of filthy garbage. Some have bodies of skin and bones like a leafless tree, like a palm tree without its top. Some mouths on fire each night, eat food that causes their mouths to blaze. So when hungry ghosts put things in their mouth they think will cool them, they just turn into fire, water and food. Some wretched ones do not even find filth, such as pus, excrement, blood, and the like, hitting each other's faces. They drink the pus that oozes from the white goiters from others' necks, from at their necks. For their hungry ghosts in summer, the moon is hot, and in the winter the sun is cold. For them, fruit trees turn fruitless. Their mere glance dries up the stream. So they're so just craving everything and can't get to anything that they want. They're so hungry all the time. To them, a delicious meal would be pus or blood, but it's just a mirage when they get to it. That lake that we see isn't even something that we see as water. They see as pus and blood and get to it, and it just disappears because of their karma. Just such a state of suffering. So we can relate to that insatiability. But theirs just can't have any kind of relief. The sun is, cold, affects them. It says the moon's hot and the sun's cold. The moon is like blazing hot to them and the sun is freezing cold. So they don't experience normalcy in any way. So you've had dark times possibly in your life. maybe craving things, or just so sad and upset and just lost. And I think you can relate to how hungry ghosts could feel. And then the animal realm. It says in the friendly lever, in rebirth as an animal, there are various sufferings: being killed, bound, beaten, and so forth. Those who have cast away the virtues of peace horribly eat each other. Some die because of their pearls, fur, bone, meat, or skin. Other powerless animals are put to work, being kicked, hit, whipped, jabbed with an iron hook, or prodded. So this is inarguable. We see this. We know this is reality. We probably have, some of us have bought or have pearls, right? Leather, bone, gelatin. So these animals have to be used and are killed, used and led around like slaves. We enslave them. Or they live in an environment outside where they're constantly terrified, constantly seeking shelter. Really have no form of happiness that's sustainable because of the constant fear and worry. And then we say, giddy up, you know, we whip an animal to make it go faster, or to pull our cart faster. Or we put the metal thing in the side of the elephant so it goes. And if you ever ridden an elephant in India. So the Buddha is not speaking about things that we can't relate to or we can't see. And Nagarjuna in the friendly letter here, making commentary, is just saying, see, you see this. I spoke of a few things you don't see. 200 years ago, this person, you know, in the Northeast didn't probably believe that the rainforest had, you know, fluorescent animals, right? We just haven't seen them. Are we so arrogant that we think that only what we see could be real? We know all the time. Science figures out all the time there's more, right? And science is so limited, and they keep finding out they're wrong and make a correction. And then they make a correction, right? And that correction is the correct until it's been corrected. And we're okay with that. We're okay with that sort of system. So as we become more realized, our perception gets corrected. We're able to see the things that are existent that our limited perception can't see. And the Buddha said, stay tuned. This is all real. I've seen it. Arya beings have seen it. It won't take you to be a Buddha to know there's these lower realms. If these lower realms exist, you'll be able to know they exist long before that through meditation and realization. So you won't have to wait till then to say, okay, I'm waiting until the end of this book to find out if these things that were described in such horrific ways were true or not. If we don't get our act together, we'll experience them again. And then we'll be, maybe a human who could think about it and won't believe it again. But if we're start to engage in meditation and have these realizations that come about through uniting, calm abiding and special insight, and then perceiving reality differently, then our perspective becomes much broader, and our ability to see a greater expanse of realms occurs. And that's why the Buddha can see more than a Hinayana hearer, solitary realizer who's in nirvana, because they haven't expanded because of the obstructions to omniscience, and because of the lingering self-cherishing attitude, the subtle self-cherishing attitude. They don't have a broad enough spectrum to be able to see all sentient beings. And they can see there's 6 realms, but they can't count all of the beings in them and among all those 6 because of their limitations, because they've practiced an incomplete path. If we consider that and this isn't any kind of disparagement, but we're using logic. We're using our brains around here. We're not just saying, oh, let's just be careful what we say, right? If we look at a Hinayana solitary realizer or a Hinayana hearer, they've practiced an incomplete path, because all paths lead to Buddhahood. That one didn't. That will eventually lead to Buddhahood if you then pick up as a sharp capacity being. Say you're in nirvana as a Hinayanist. Now the Buddha comes and says, hey, you don't have the greatest spectrum, the greatest perspective. You still have obstructions to omniscience. You're not as reliable as you could be, and you haven't completed your own needs in a way. So now they're a being of sharp capacity, right? This is when they say bodhisattva of sharp capacity. They're speaking of someone who's seen emptiness. So this could be such a being who goes from a hearer, solitary Hinayana state of nirvana and starts the bodhisattva ground again. This would be a sharp being who would have to traverse the path that leads to complete Buddhahood. So what they did previously was incomplete. It's not a complete path. It's a path that will eventually lead to Buddhahood, but they have an incomplete realization because they have obstructions to omniscience. It's just so clear. And in order to have a complete realization, one has to get rid of the afflictive obstructions and the obstructions to omniscience. So we see that in order to fulfill all of the kind of things necessary to be a Buddha, all of these other pathways are necessary. But if they are the path in and of themselves as a destination, they're incomplete unless they are the final destination of Buddhahood. And all sentient beings will become a Buddha. So it's not something that is an exclusive club. It's just a matter of if I was thinking about a story the other day where Adrian and Rinpoche went to go to, I believe it was Adrian and Rinpoche, went to go to New York. I think there were some people in the car, and they ended up not looking at maps or something like this and not taking directions and saying, I think we'll go this way. I think there was maybe not the Google, right? Back then, this is 20 something years ago. And they were going, I think, to a teaching in New York City. And they didn't, follow the exact path that gets you to New York City. They followed a path that, eventually got them there, but didn't get them directly to New York City. And let me tell you why. So they're driving, and now they're going over the George Washington Bridge. And anyone who knows, once you're going over the George Washington Bridge, you are not heading any longer into Manhattan or getting on the West Side Highway. You've missed the FDR. You've got issues. Now you're going to New Jersey. Now, of course, right? You end up in New Jersey, and there's a way to go around and then end up back at New York City by going back over the George Washington Bridge or the Lincoln Tunnel. But was it necessary to go through all of that to get there? Right? So they ended up there. They ended up when they needed to be there. So the destination was the same, but the length of time it took to get there was a lot longer because it wasn't a direct route. So when we look at the teachings that Lord Buddha gave us, the quickest route, of course, is Tantrayana. That's the jet plane to get to our destination. But if we don't know how to fly a jet plane, probably not a good idea to hop in one, go down to, Tweed or whatever airport and just hop in a jet plane and turn it on and think that, yeah, this is the best way for me to get to New York because it's the fastest way. It's a jet plane. But if you don't know how to fly a jet plane, it would be preposterous. I tell you that story and you're like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. But we do this all the time as practitioners. We decide that we're of the highest scope. We don't know anything about the lower teachings. We go right to the highest Tantra teachings. We go right to the most subtle view. We misunderstand the highest teachings. We misunderstand the most subtle view. And we end up in a state of misunderstanding for a good part of our life. We think we've had realizations. And unfortunately, much greater beings have had higher realizations that were just as wrong. So it's important that we kind of check ourselves and know who we are. Can we fly a jet plane? Okay. Do we know the exact directions in the perfection vehicle that will make us a Buddha? Looking at perfection in Tantra vehicle, we know that the Tantric vehicle is the resultant vehicle. We know that the perfection vehicle is the causal vehicle. We know that the preliminaries within the perfection vehicle are necessary foundations of the tantric vehicle. Do we know what those preliminaries are? Do we know what the stages of the path of the perfection vehicle, so we understand what the grounds and so forth are that we're traversing as a tantric deity, if you will, right? So do we understand what those obstacles are? Do we understand what the abandonments are and so forth? Do we understand grounds, paths, and results in the perfection vehicle of Mahayana? Do we understand those things? What it would take to become a Buddha according to those great masters, Maitreya, Sangha, and Manjushri and Nagarjuna? What would the profound view and extensive deeds lineage say about that? The Tilo Naro lineage of blessings is the jet plane. That's the tantric lineage that allows us to get to New York City the quickest way. But if we don't know how to fly a jet plane, then we won't get there in the jet plane. We have to learn how to, drive in general, right? Before we probably get into a plane. It would make sense to have some kind of groundwork done in driving in a car and figuring out how to get places in a safer manner that, couldn't allow for so much destruction, right? And so much harm to ourself and others. So we learn, how to drive. And before that, we probably have to take, lessons on how we would go about doing that before we even get on that road to Buddhahood. Maybe bicycle, right? Maybe bicycle or tricycle or, something like that's not as dangerous, like, in terms of hurting ourselves and others. We can't go quite as fast. And so forth. So you can see how in just normal life, right? I mean, it's a funny example, but we kind of as we're younger, we have training wheels, then we learn to drive a car, and then some people learn to drive airplanes, right? Likewise, if we want to progress spiritually, we can't just get in a jet plane of Tantra. We can't just assume we're Mahayanists, and if we don't know how to enter the door of the Mahayana, and we don't know how to drive the car, how would we know how to drive something? How are we going to drive an airplane? And then a bicycle, maybe with training wheels, or a tricycle is like the teachings for beings of small and medium capacity, which are the Hinayana teachings, which all are necessary foundations in order for us to fly that jet plane, right? If we want to ride the bicycle, then drive a car, and then eventually drive a jet plane, we want to understand the teachings shared in common with beings of small and medium capacity, and view our mind with them, have a desire to emerge from the lower realms of cyclic existence, and understand what those beings have to experience, and we have to experience, and will have to experience, and then have a desire to remove ourselves from all realms of cyclic existence by understanding that we're in the higher realms and we have to suffer, and the demigods and gods have suffering, and they have uncertainty, and they'll have to be reborn in the lower realms, and we want to emerge from all realms of cyclic existence, and that causes us to want to help others. We know their plight, we know it, we know everything that could happen to them because we've studied everything that can happen to us, and we know that everything that can happen to us stinks, so we know that everything that can happen to them stinks. So we see how all of these things are products of one another. And then when we want to help them in the highest way possible, once we have this mind of love and understands that this being that we love and have so much compassion for is empty of true establishment, that's when we can get in the jet plane of Tantrayana and start to really, really make things happen. When we're bodhisattvas and we have a desire to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings, and we know that we can't bear the thought of spending any more time than we possibly have to becoming Buddhas, because the more time it takes, the longer people have to suffer in these various realms we learned about in the small and medium scope that we want to emerge ourselves from. So it's so important to understand and be very fluent in all of these things, because they enhance our later meditations. And they make it possible. I mean, why are Westerners so much cooler with, I have 24 arms and 4 faces, then there may be a hell realm. I'll never understand this. I am Chenrezig with 4 arms, right? I hold a jewel, right? And a rosary and a flower. Everyone's so much more likely to imagine themselves as this, in a pure land, in a pure castle. But then when you say, like, let's imagine that there's a hell realm, it's like, oh, that just sounds like something I learned before I didn't like. And it's so funny. And the reality of it is it's just a self-cherishing attitude that's like, I don't like that. And it just doesn't make sense. And it's just our ignorance saying, if I don't know it, I'm so smart, it can't possibly be there. But come on, folks, there's so much stuff that we don't know about the universe and all of these different realms. And it'd be silly to think that we wouldn't have to rely upon, something a little more than what we can see and what limited old science has been able to figure out. I mean, ask them, oh, what's consciousness? Give them 10 minutes to figure that one out. And it's like, oh, well, there's brains doing this and there's lights that make when he's happy, but what's causing consciousness, And we start to hit some, we start to then have to get into past life studies and science. You see all these studies going on in Virginia and all over the world about tukdom and past life studies and rebirth and so forth. So, if science is starting to say, we can't figure this thing out, there's got to be more to it. Be willing to say you haven't figured this thing out. There's got to be more to it. And use this as a tool to develop more desire to get out of cyclic existence and love others completely. Love them and have compassion for them. Want them to be happy and free from suffering. What is happiness? It certainly isn't the 8 sufferings, the 6 sufferings, the 3 sufferings. It certainly isn't hell, hungry, goes to animal, human demigods or gods. It's the happiness of the Buddha. They don't want 10% happiness. They don't want sometimes happiness. Everyone wants always happiness. And that's only the Buddha has that always infinite happiness at its highest level, right? So it's important to think about this. Think about all of these beings deprived of infinite happiness and all of the situations they'll have to endure and how out of control you are and they are. And it makes us relate to each other in a lot better way. And if we can think that it could get so much worse for all of us, I think that if your worst enemy were to bring you maybe a fan when you were in a hot hell, they wouldn't be named that. So when we do Tonglen, we imagine ourselves transforming into wish-fulfilling jewels. We imagine ourselves going to the hell realm and going to the hot hell and giving them cool, and going to the cold hell and giving them warmth, transforming our bodies through, like a wish-fulfilling jewel, right? So we can really use these meditations to get deeper and deeper, and later on, when we're doing the higher practice, such as equalizing and exchanging self with others, giving and taking practice, we have so much more to work with, and we can make our objects of observation more, and the greater our objects of observations become, the bigger, of course, our compassion becomes. That idea of, my neighbor who just had a child who said, I've never experienced so much love. I've never had so much happiness before. We'll multiply that times every sentient being. That potential becomes, for that happiness becomes greater and greater, and you eventually end up with the happiness of a Buddha, when you can establish that you want all beings, that without exception, to have happiness and the cause of happiness, and that you are going to provide them with that somehow by teaching them the path to it, because the Buddha can't do anything else, right? The Buddha can't remove our suffering with his or her hands. The Buddha can't wash away our misdeeds with water or something. The Buddha can't give his or her realizations to us. The Buddha can only teach us the truth, the reality, and then it's through that we can end our suffering, and we can become the most reliable guide, and have infinite happiness. So I will end there. Does anybody have any questions? I thank you all for listening so well. I'm sorry on Instagram, I can only go on for an hour at a time. It becomes clumsy to try to turn it off and on. So I'll get better at it so I can click people on and off. I saw there were quite a few people on the first run. But hopefully what anybody heard or was able to hear, I hope was of some benefit. Really, this has been the most benefit to me, because I'm able to reinforce my mind with it, have to prepare for it. Kensur Geshe Wandak was just so skilled in instruction and had just the answer to every question that was necessary. And I was telling Geshe Aga the other day that I had big shoes to fill. And I said one of Rinpoche's shoes would be like a house I could live in. So it's very, very different, but I can acquaint my mind with it And I know that the things that I'm presenting to you are accurate and would stand up in the court of any scholar. So I feel happy that Rinpoche has given us the blessing to have such accurate information and has drilled into my head. You better not screw this up with information that can't be found in Lord Buddha's teachings or the authentic Indian commentaries. And you better not teach something that doesn't work, because that's a real part of whether the teachings are real or not, is if they're producing realizations in the minds of beings. And Rinpoche was always clear that he wanted to do that. He taught the lower teachings more often than not because he believed that's how we could produce realization in our minds. Renunciation is what would allow us to have a joyous effort day and night so that we practice and become Buddhas as quick as possible. And by understanding our current state and understanding that we have a right to be dissatisfied and we don't have to be dissatisfied, it will urge us to do more. And Khenso Geshe Wandak urged us day and night to do more than we currently were. So I'm just so grateful to have had such a holy being as an example then and now, because he's always, every day in my life. It seems like in the morning, right when I wake up, it's like Rinpoche time, and there's like a lot of reflection. I do some of my prayers, and right when I get up, I try to reinforce my mind with this human existence and impermanence, and then go right downstairs and try to read, and try to get control of my mind through the great texts. And that was a gift that Rinpoche gave me and gave all of us. So I encourage you, I said on one of these TikTok things, keep books around. Don't just keep them in a special glass case. Rinpoche would say, I know, keep books higher. But my advice is to leave them places where you'll be able to grab them, right? So you'll pick it up to learn. And Rinpoche had books all over in his room. And I've, tried to keep them in nice places around, in different places around the house. Sometimes they stack up when I start to get out of control with like, let me look at that text. But it's been such a great gift to know, oh, if I leave these books around, they'll be at my fingertips. I should always be studying. And we have videos of Rinpoche studying at the end of his life, always studying, always studying, always studying. And he was such a great example for all of us. And never be happy with partial instructions, please. All right, let's close with our prayers. We see that wonderful picture of Rinpoche in the black and white, sitting with the pit bulls, and they're all laying there totally subdued, like he's the great master, the great Bodhisattva Tome Zampo, who wrote the 37 practices of the Bodhisattva, who they said used to travel around, right, with a fox, a wild pet fox, and it was just so subdued and didn't bite anyone because Tome Zampo was just a real Bodhisattva and was just so peaceful. There's other stories of great Bodhisattvas who are robbed, and right when they're robbed, they say things like, I believe it's Tome Zampo, but if it's another great master, I apologize, who they're being robbed, and the robber is about to run away, and they say, hold on, I want to dedicate all of these objects to you, and then he does it, and the robber starts to run, and he goes, hold on, and the robber thinks it's a trick at this point, right? He's thinking, what do you want now? He's ready to run again. He says, don't go that way, because my benefactor is actually up the street, and he'll see you have all my stuff. You better go that way, so he doesn't catch you, right? So this is the mind that cherishes others that we're talking about. And when we read the 8 verses for mind training by Geshe Langri Tamba, the sentiments in this prayer, the sentiments that make a being such a great being that, it says that even wild animals are just peaceful around them, and they always put others' needs before their own, even if it's seemingly hurting them. But we have to remember, Shantideva and great masters like Nagarjuna says, at our level, we have to be very careful that we don't export more than we have, and that we shouldn't, at our level, give away our body, give away our eyes like a bodhisattva could. We should just give vegetables to someone who's hungry. 8 verses on training the mind by Geshe Langri Tamba. The determination to accomplish the highest welfare of all sentient beings who surpass even a wish-granting jewel, I will learn to hold them supremely dear. Whenever I associate with others, I will learn to think of myself as the lowest amongst all, and respectively hold others to be supreme from the very depths of my heart. In all actions, I will learn to search into my mind, and as soon as a disturbing emotion arises, Endangering myself and others, I will firmly face and avert it. I will learn to cherish ill-natured beings and those oppressed by strong misdeeds and sufferings, as if I had found a precious treasure difficult to find. When others out of jealousy treat me badly with abuse, slander, and so on, I will learn to take all loss and offer victory to them. When the one whom I benefit with great hope unreasonably hurts me very badly, I will learn to view that person as an excellent spiritual guide. In short, I will learn to offer to everyone, everywhere without exception, all help and happiness directly and indirectly, and respectively take upon myself all the harm and suffering of my mothers. I will learn to keep all these practices undefiled by the stains of the 8 worldly concerns, and by understanding all phenomena is like illusion, be released from the bondage of attachment. Now we'll do the concluding Mandala offering, Thanksgiving Mandala offering for the teaching and the dedication prayers. And once again, imagine all the Gurus, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas in the space in front of you and all sentient beings around you, and you're leading them in this Mandala offering. They're making a Mandala offering. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure land. I dedicate whatever virtues I've collected for the benefit of the teachings of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losandrapa to shine forever. Send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri, and likewise Samantabhadra as well. With whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the 3 times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land, surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All powerful, Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. That was a long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In all our lives, may we never be separated from Kensur Geshe Wandak in whatever form he or she chooses to show us, whether it's in the emanation body, in these normal worlds, or the enjoyment body when we are Arya Bodhisattvas. May we always meet with this holy being until we are Buddhas, and then aid him or her in saving all sentient beings from the plight of cyclic existence and the plight of the state of not having happiness at the highest degree. Thank you. I was going to make up a new word, happinessless or something. So that's where I got jammed up. But I hope you all have a week that you engage in the practices to be free from all suffering and have the highest happiness that can occur. And that's the state of Buddhahood. And we know that if we modify our behavior by changing our minds, then we won't accumulate the things that will lead to our suffering. And if we develop a wisdom that is kind of pushed around by a desire to become a Buddha for the sake of others, then we'll be able to achieve complete Buddhahood so quickly. And I hope you do everything you can this week to achieve Buddhahood. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all on Instagram and Facebook for joining, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. And I hope your mind is virtuous. Thanks, guys. Have a great week. I really appreciate all of you. Oh, I muted.